What if happiness is not merely difficult to attain? What if it is, by its very nature, impossible? This is not a rhetorical provocation. It was the sincere conclusion of one of the 19th century's most rigorous philosophers, a man who argued that human desire is not a path toward satisfaction, but a mechanism of perpetual suffering. His name was Arthur Schopenhauer, and his central work, The World as Will and Representation, remains one of the most unsettling, and for many readers, one of the most honest accounts of what it means to exist. Today, we examine that account. Arthur Schopenhauer was born in 1788 in Danzig into a wealthy merchant family. His early life was shaped by extensive travel across Europe, which exposed him quite young to the scale of human suffering, poverty, illness, and social inequity, in a way that would later inform the pessimistic cast of his philosophy. He studied at the University of Göttingen and later Berlin, where he was trained in the Kantian tradition. This detail matters enormously. Schopenhauer considered himself the philosophical heir of Immanuel Kant, and his entire system begins from a Kantian premise that we never perceive the world as it truly is, only as it appears to us, filtered through the structures of our own minds. He published The World as Will and Representation in 1818 at the age of 30. It was, by his own account, the single achievement of his life, a system he considered essentially complete and would spend the following decades defending, expanding, and revising, but never abandoning. The book was, at first, almost entirely ignored. Schopenhauer's academic career was overshadowed by the dominance of Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, whose philosophy of history and reason stood in direct opposition to Schopenhauer's account of a world governed by blind, irrational striving. Schopenhauer, in fact, scheduled his own university lectures to directly compete with Hegel's, a decision that failed spectacularly, drawing almost no students. It was only late in his life, in the 1850s, that Schopenhauer achieved genuine recognition. By then, his ideas had already begun to influence a younger generation of thinkers, artists, and writers, a line of influence that would eventually reach Friedrich Nietzsche, Richard Wagner, Sigmund Freud, and, well beyond philosophy, figures such as Leo Tolstoy and Thomas Mann. The book's title announces its central thesis with unusual directness. The world is both will and representation. To understand this, we must take each half in turn. Representation for Schopenhauer refers to the world as it appears to a perceiving subject. Following Kant, he argues that space, time, and causality are not properties of the world in itself. They are the structuring conditions of human cognition. When you perceive a tree, a chair, or another person, you are not encountering that object directly. You are encountering your own mind's organization of raw sensory data into a coherent, orderly experience. This means that everything we ordinarily call the world, the entire domain of objects, events, and relations we navigate daily, is, strictly speaking, a representation. It is real, in the sense that it is not an illusion or a dream, but it is also mind-dependent. Remove the perceiving subject, and the world of objects, as such, disappears with it. This is a demanding philosophical claim, and Schopenhauer was well aware of its difficulty, but he did not intend it as a piece of abstract epistemology for its own sake. It sets up the far more consequential half of his system, the question of what, if anything, lies behind the representation, what the world is, independent of how it appears to us. Kant had argued that this underlying reality, what he called the thing in itself, was fundamentally unknowable. Schopenhauer's most original move is to reject this limitation, at least in one specific case. Our own bodies. Consider your own body. You know it in two entirely different ways. From the outside, as an object among objects, a representation extended in space, subject to causal law, observable like any other physical thing. But you also know it from the inside, in a way no external observer ever could, as felt, willed movement. When you raise your arm, you do not merely observe an arm rising as an external event. You experience the act of willing it. From this single point of privileged access, Schopenhauer builds his entire metaphysics. He argues that this inner experience of willing gives us a direct clue to the nature of reality itself. If my own body beneath its outward appearance is at bottom an expression of will, a blind, striving force with no ultimate goal or rational structure, then the same must be true, by extension, of all of nature. The force that drives a plant to grow toward light, that drives water to flow downhill, that drives the planets in their courses, is, at its core, one and the same undifferentiated will expressing itself through countless individual forms. This is crucial. Schopenhauer's will is not a rational, purposeful force, and it is certainly not a divine will in any traditional theological sense. It has no ultimate goal. It does not strive toward anything beyond its own perpetual striving. It is, in his words, groundless. A ceaseless craving that exists prior to and beneath all reason, all individuality, and all consciousness. Human beings on this account are simply the point at which this cosmic will becomes self-aware. Our desires, our drives, our restless dissatisfaction, these are not incidental features of human psychology. They are the direct expression, at the level of individual consciousness, of the same blind force that animates all of nature. This metaphysical picture leads directly to the conclusion for which Schopenhauer is most famous, his pessimism. If the essence of existence is will, that is, ceaseless striving, then suffering is not an unfortunate accident that occasionally interrupts an otherwise contented life. Suffering is the default condition of existence, because will, by its nature, is perpetually unsatisfied. Every desire we fulfill is immediately replaced by a new one. The satisfaction of a want brings, at best, a brief and fleeting relief. What Schopenhauer describes as merely the absence of pain, quickly followed by boredom, which he treats as simply another form of suffering, arising the moment desire has nothing left to strive toward. This produces what later commentators have called the pendulum of human existence, a perpetual oscillation between the pain of unsatisfied desire and the emptiness of boredom. Once desire is temporarily stilled, genuine, lasting satisfaction on this account does not exist, not because of bad luck or poor circumstances, but because it is structurally impossible given the nature of will itself. It is worth being precise here. Schopenhauer's pessimism is not simply the observation that life contains suffering. Many philosophers before him had acknowledged that. His claim is stronger and more radical, that suffering is built into the very structure of existence, and that the pursuit of happiness, in any final or complete sense, is therefore a pursuit of something that does not exist. This is, understandably, where many readers part ways with Schopenhauer, but it is worth noting that his system is not simply a counsel of despair. He also proposes paths of, if not escape, then temporary relief, chief among them, aesthetic contemplation, in which the individual, absorbed in art or beauty, momentarily loses the sense of individual willing and achieves a kind of peaceful, will-less state of pure perception. Later, he turns to ascetic renunciation, a deliberate stilling of desire itself, as the closest approximation to genuine peace available to a conscious being. Why does any of this matter now, more than 2 centuries after Schopenhauer's birth? Because the psychological pattern he describes is strikingly legible in contemporary life. Consider the structure of consumer culture. The acquisition of a new object generates a brief surge of satisfaction, reliably followed by a return to baseline dissatisfaction and the generation of a new want. Marketing, in a sense, does not need to manufacture desire from nothing. It only needs to redirect a craving that Schopenhauer would argue is already structurally guaranteed to reassert itself. Consider, too, the modern preoccupation with achievement, the sense common among high performers that reaching a long-sought goal produces satisfaction lasting days rather than a lifetime before attention pivots to the next target. This is precisely the pattern Schopenhauer described as the oscillation between striving and emptiness. None of this requires accepting Schopenhauer's full metaphysical apparatus, his cosmic will, his account of the thing in itself. One can set aside the metaphysics and still find, in his psychological analysis of desire, a remarkably useful diagnostic tool, a framework for understanding why satisfaction so often proves temporary and why the accumulation of more possessions, more achievements, more status, so rarely resolves the underlying restlessness that drives the pursuit in the first place. Schopenhauer is not an easy philosopher to sit with. His picture of existence offers no final resolution, no guaranteed happy ending, no promise that effort and virtue will ultimately be rewarded with contentment. For some readers, this makes him unbearable. For others, it makes him one of the most honest voices in the history of philosophy, a thinker willing to follow an argument to its conclusion, regardless of how uncomfortable that conclusion proves to be. What the world as will and representation offers, in the end, is not comfort. It is clarity, a rigorous, unflinching account of desire, suffering, and the structure of consciousness itself, developed with a philosophical precision that continues to reward careful reading nearly 2 centuries later. Whether one accepts his conclusions or not, Schopenhauer forces a question that few philosophers pose so directly. Not simply what should we do, but what, fundamentally, are we, beneath the desires that seem to define us? If you found this exploration of Schopenhauer valuable, consider subscribing to Saga Thinks, where each episode examines a significant work of philosophy or critical thought in depth. Thank you for watching.